Good day from the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and welcome to our day-long and evening-long coverage of the return from the International Space Station of 3 of the crew members constituting the Expedition 54 crew. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be on for a number of hours throughout the course of the afternoon and the evening as the flight control team here in Houston works globally with support personnel in Kazakhstan and in Russia to bring home the 3 crew members that are the focus of attention today: Russian cosmonaut Alexander Mazurkin and NASA astronauts Joe Acaba and Mark Vande Hei. Here in the flight control room, the shift handover for the Orbit 3 team has just been completed. On console at this hour, at the bottom of your screen, is Flight Director Judd Freeling. He's joined on console to his right at the top of your screen by European Space Agency astronaut Andreas Mogensen, a veteran of Soyuz launch and landing activities. Mogensen will be talking with the crew on board the International Space Station throughout the course of the day's activities. Also here in the flight control room on console is the visiting vehicle officer, Adam Faust. He will be talking directly to a team of counterparts at the Russian Mission Control Center across the ocean on the outskirts of Moscow in the town of Korolyov, who will be coordinating today's activities to bring home Mazurkin, Acaba, and Vande Hei. This is a live view from a balcony camera overlooking the International Space Station flight control room at the Russian Mission Control Center you become familiar with over the course of the past few years. This is the team that will be supervising the undocking of the Soyuz MS-06 later today from the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station and its eventual deorbit and landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan. We'll be talking more about conditions in Kazakhstan and the choreography of tonight's landing and recovery operations in just a moment. The 3 crew members who are poised to say farewell to their colleagues on board the International Space Station and begin the trek home are Alexander Mazurkin, the Soyuz commander, who will be strapped into the center seat of the descent module of the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft for tonight's activities. He will be flanked on his left by the board engineer number 1, NASA flight engineer Mark Vande Hei, and on his right by Joe Acaba, the flight engineer who is wrapping up his mission along with Mazurkin and Vande Hei. This trio of crew members began their expedition as part of Expedition 53 all the way back in September, just 3 weeks after Hurricane Harvey drenched Houston and swamped the ensuing locales. Hurricane Harvey, of course, striking the Texas coast back on the last week in August, and this crew launched just 3 weeks after that from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Assuming an on-time landing this evening, this crew will have aggregated 168 days in space and also aboard the International Space Station, having made a same-day rendezvous from the launch pad in Baikonur to its docking to the Poisk module on the International Space Station. They will have completed 2,688 orbits of the Earth and 71.1 million miles of travel in this 168 days in space. For Mazurkin, completing his second flight into space, his total time on these 2 expeditions of 168 days will bring him to an aggregate total of 334 days in space on his 2 flights. He also conducted 1 spacewalk during this mission, a Russian record-setting 8-hour and 13-minute excursion that he conducted several weeks ago. Joe Acaba, with the completion of this flight later tonight and the end of his 3rd flight into space, will have accrued 306 days in space. Another long-duration mission several years ago on the station and a space shuttle assembly mission before that. This completes Mark Vande Hei's first flight into space, 168 days, and Vande Hei also logged 4 spacewalks during Expeditions 53 and 54 in support of the upgrades made to the Canadarm2 robotic arm and the latching end effectors that were replaced and lubricated during the course of that mission. As I mentioned before, this crew began its journey of 5.5 months on board the International Space Station with its launch back in September from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. This was the view on Site 1 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome as the Soyuz MS-06 lifted off from that launch pad. 8 minutes and 45 seconds later, the Soyuz separated from the third stage of the Soyuz booster into its preliminary orbit and made its way to the International Space Station just 4 orbits later, a 6-hour rendezvous that brought Mazurkin, Vande Hei, and Akaba to a docking to the Poisk module to begin their tenure on board the International Space Station as part of Expedition 53. In December, they transitioned to become part of Expedition 54.
Come again, please. Georgi, I'm standing by if you need me. Mark didn't copy your message.
You're hearing an interpreter translating the conversations between the Soyuz flight control team at the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow and the departing crew on board the International Space Station. They have activated the systems in the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft. Again, Mazurkin will be in the center seat as Soyuz commander for undocking and landing today. He'll be flanked on his left by Mark Vande Hei and on his right by Joe Akaba. In the center section of the Soyuz spacecraft, the descent module, the only portion of the Soyuz spacecraft that returns to Earth. The situation down in Kazakhstan is this. The weather conditions, as they are this time of the year every year, are posing challenges for recovery operations that are supervised by the Russian civilian search and recovery forces known as Rosaviatsia. Over the weekend, a NASA plane flew from Houston to the staging city of Karaganda, Kazakhstan, with a contingent of NASA personnel, followed by a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft that flew from Chkalovsky Aircraft outside Star City, Russia, which arrived in Karaganda on Sunday with an additional array of NASA and Russian personnel. Early Monday, with less than an optimal weather forecast in the offing for Kazakhstan, most of the NASA and Russian recovery team members flew on Russian Mi-8 helicopters from Karaganda, 2 hours to the southwest, to a forward staging point in the remote town of Jezkazgan, about 90 miles from the primary landing site.
Go ahead.
In the wee hours this morning, and with weather conditions deteriorating in south-central Kazakhstan, Rosaviatsia deployed several all-terrain vehicles, ATVs, from Jezkazgan to travel overland to or near the landing site. Among those making that trek were Chad Rowe, NASA's Director of Human Spaceflight in Russia, and NASA flight surgeon and 2 Russian nurses assigned to NASA. The situation as it stands at this moment is that the front that moved through the area of the south-central steppe of Kazakhstan, moving from northwest to southeast, bringing snow and freezing rain and other overcast conditions. It is moving to the southeast. The last word that we received here in Mission Control was that conditions were improving somewhat, and that we believe that the NASA plane, the NASA Gulfstream jet that is at the Karaganda airport, and the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft likely will be able to fly a short distance to the forward staging site in Jezkazgan. That would be good news, because that would imply that we will be conducting a nominal helicopter recovery operation later this evening. But that has not yet been confirmed by the Russian search and recovery forces. Everything is on the table for the safe recovery of Akaba, Vande Hei, and Mazurkin, and we'll be standing by for further word as the afternoon and evening move along. Aboard the International Space Station, in the passageway between the station's Russian segment and the hatchway, in the vestibule in the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment, the crew is getting set up for its farewells and its hatch closure, which will be coming shortly. We're expecting the 6 crew members to gather in the neighborhood of about 1:50 p.m. Central Time, 2:50 p.m. Eastern Time, to say their final farewells to one another, after which Mazurkin, Vande Hei, and Akaba will float through the hatchway, take a final inspection of the seals along the circumference of the hatch to their Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft, and close the hatch to begin the process of preparing to don their Sokol launch and entry suits, to strap themselves into their respective seats in the descent module of the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft, and to begin their preparations for undocking that is scheduled at 5:08 and 30 seconds p.m. Central Time, 6:08 p.m. Eastern Time. This view again, looking at the hatchway in the vestibule of the Poisk module of the International Space Station, looking into the hatch. That is the Soyuz MS-06. The Soyuz has now been put on autonomous power as Russian cosmonaut Alexander Mazurkin, the Soyuz commander, was inside the Soyuz a short time ago, configuring the spacecraft for autonomous power, which it is on. A short time from now, the 6 crew members again will gather to say farewell to one another right in that area. On the left side of your screen, you're looking at one of the Russian spacesuits, the Orlan spacesuits that are worn for spacewalking activities outside of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. Once again, as we mentioned earlier, the weather down in Kazakhstan, which has been very dicey over the past 48 hours, appears to be improving slightly. It is 1:30 in the morning at the landing site, and so before long, the NASA and Russian personnel that are comprising the search and recovery forces will be in the process of getting up from their respective hotels, getting a briefing on the weather, and hopefully making their way in the Russian Mi-8 helicopters down from Zhezkazgan for a 30-minute helicopter ride down in the vicinity of the landing zone. You're looking at NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei as he stows some final gear inside the Soyuz spacecraft. Vande Hei again wrapping up his first flight into space, 168 days in space since he and his crewmates were launched in mid-September from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. So just to recap, a handful of all-terrain vehicles were dispatched for an overland trek in the wee hours this morning from Zhezkazgan toward the vicinity of the landing site. They're not quite there. They decided to stop their overnight journey and to take a rest. That's what they've been up to. Some number of kilometers away from the landing zone itself. They will resume their journey to the landing site a bit later in tonight's activities. The key here is the movement of the two prime recovery aircraft, the NASA Gulfstream jet and the Gagarin cosmonaut training aircraft, that are both on the runway at the airport in Karaganda, getting them down to Zhezkazgan, if that is in fact still the plan, a few hours from now, and then to fly the Russian Mi-8 helicopters much later in today's activities this evening from the Zhezkazgan airport down to the landing site. The preference is to try to stage recovery operations from the town of Zhezkazgan, which is only 90 miles away from the prime landing site in the southern zone. The Soyuz spacecraft will make a southwest to northeasterly trek during its final phase of its entry, following its deorbit burn, and by doing so will place the crew members just a short 30-minute helicopter ride away from their respective planes and the rest of the search and recovery teams that will be gathered at the forward landing zone in Zhezkazgan. Van de Heij now in the hatchway as he is fitting his communications cap on so that he can make sure that he has a good fit and a good communications link through that communications cap once he suits up in his Sokol launch and entry suit a bit later on today. You just saw in the field of view a moment or two ago Russian cosmonaut Anton Shkaplerov, who is now the Expedition 55 commander. Expedition 55 actually formally begins at the point of undocking, which will take place a little over 3.5 hours from now. That is how expeditions are marked in terms of their duration from undocking to undocking. So Expedition 54 will officially come to an end at the time the Soyuz MS-06 undocks, and Expedition 55 will begin under the command of Anton Shkaplerov. In advance of that, however, yesterday, on Monday, Shkaplerov took over the formal command of the International Space Station from his departing Russian cosmonaut crewmate, Alexander Mazurkin. Let's take a look back 24 hours at the change of command ceremony in which Mazurkin handed over command of the space station to Anton Shkaplerov.
So, if you're ready, we're ready to start our procedure, finally.
We're ready for you, Sasha.
Спасибо большое, Doug. Well, Houston, Huntsville, Munich, Tsukuba, Moscow, France. Expedition 54 is almost complete, and it's a great honor, a pleasure for me to realize that it was like one day. It looked like it started only yesterday, and already it's a finish of it. And it's a great pleasure. It was because of all these gentlemen. It was because of all you guys, all teams on the world in all MCCs. And we really respect your professionalism, your attitude. I really respect, gentlemen, your attitude and your professionalism, and I will never forget our jobs and staying here. And also, it's because not only work with you pleasure, work and share everywhere here with you. It's a great pleasure for me. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you so much, MCCs, that you allowed us use this station. We didn't broke almost anything, and hope we did something good thing and helpful thing for science. And still looking forward now to going home back to the Earth and to work with you guys on the ground, and missing for you, gentlemen. Expedition 55 is your time, and this is your key of this fascinating car.
Nice key, Sasha, key of the International Space Station. First of all, I want to say this is a very important day for us, for all of us. I want to say thank you very much to our crewmates, our friends, our brothers, Sasha, Joe, and Mark. You did very good job here on board of the International Space Station, and now you are ready to return to our planet. Alexander, I'm proud to be part of the great team you have been leading here on board of the International Space Station. Now station is in the excellent condition, and we will do all the best to keeping this unique scientific laboratory fully functional and safe. With honor, I am taking commanded of the International Space Station for Expedition 55.
Well done. You have a very proud team down here. To Mark and Joe and Sasha, we wish you a safe journey home. Счастливо пути и мягкие посадка. And to Anton and to Maker and Nemo. To you guys, if the other team broke anything, we'll just blame it on Maker and Nemo. And now we're looking forward to having Mark and Joe and Sasha safely on the ground, and Anton and Maker and Nemo. We're looking forward to working with you over the coming days, and we wish you fair wind and following seas as you sail your ship.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doug.
Doug, thank you so much and hope to see you soon. Thanks.
And again, that was the scene 24 hours ago on Monday for the traditional change of command ceremony. In this case, Alexander Mazurkin, part of the departing crew, handing over command of the International Space Station to cosmonaut Anton Shkaplerov. Shkaplerov and his two colleagues who will remain on board the International Space Station following undocking that's coming up a little over 3 hours or so from now. The remaining crew for Expedition 55 will be Anton Shkaplerov as the station commander, joined by NASA flight engineer Scott Tingle and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency flight engineer Norishige Kanai. The three of them will remain on board as a three-man crew for the next 3 weeks until the launch on March 21st of the next trio of residents to the International Space Station. That will be the station, the Soyuz commander Oleg Artemyev, along with NASA astronauts Ricky Arnold and Drew Feustel, who will launch on March 21st in the Soyuz MS-08 spacecraft from the Baikonur Cosmodrome on a 2-day rendezvous, arriving at the International Space Station on March 23rd. You're looking inside the hatchway to the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft. Joe Acaba and Mark Vande Hei, the two NASA astronauts who are just hours away from returning to Earth, along with Russian cosmonaut Alexander Mazurkin, making final preparations to their respective seats in the descent module of the Soyuz spacecraft. As we are preparing for the farewells and hatch closure that will mark the end of their 6-man crew time together and the beginning of the final preparations that will lead to undocking at 5:08 p.m. Central Time, 6:08 p.m. Eastern Time. At the time of undocking, the International Space Station and the Soyuz spacecraft will be traveling 252 miles above the Earth. The Soyuz will separate from the Poisk module on the International Space Station's Russian segment of the International Space Station about 2 hours and 40 minutes or so after undocking. The deorbit burn will begin. This will be a 4-minute, 39-second retro firing of the engines on the back of the Soyuz to begin its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere. A short time later, we'll have the pyrotechnic separation of the 3 sections of the Soyuz. The descent module will be barreling through the Earth's atmosphere with temperatures building up to around 2,500 degrees around the spacecraft until it leaves the plasma regime, first deploying its parachutes, first a pilot chute, then its large drogue chute, and then the main chute in sequential fashion. The main chute deployment will then release the earlier chutes that will have deployed on a preliminary fashion. And just a few feet off the ground in south-central Kazakhstan, the soft landing engines will fire and the Soyuz will be home, with the targeted landing site just about 90 miles to the southeast of the town of Zhezkazgan, where the temperatures are expected to be in the high 20s, maybe around 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not so much the temperature that's at play today as it is the overcast and some icing and freezing conditions that have been prevalent over the course of the past couple of days. However, we're still waiting on final disposition from the search and recovery forces as to how they intend to deploy both a NASA plane and the Gagarin cosmonaut training aircraft from the Karaganda airfield to the northeast of the intended landing site. The plan as of several hours ago was to deploy those aircraft to Zhezkazgan along with 10 of the 12 Russian Mi-8 helicopters that will be circling in the vicinity of the landing zone, awaiting the arrival of the Soyuz spacecraft under its main parachute. Good view of Joe Acaba as he is nearing the end of his third flight into space, and a total of 306 days in space by the time he returns to Earth later this evening. The landing time is scheduled at 8:31 p.m. Central Time this evening, which will be 8:31 a.m. in Kazakhstan on Wednesday morning, about 27 minutes after local sunrise. As we watch Joe Acaba making his way along with Mark Vande Hei to and from the hatchway of the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft, just a quick rundown of events that are coming up over the course of the next few hours. Of course, we are in the midst of our hatch closure and farewell coverage. Later this afternoon, we'll be back on the air at 4:45 p.m. Central Time, 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time for undocking coverage that will lead to the undocking of the Soyuz MS-06 at 5:08 p.m., 6:08 p.m. Eastern Time. Once the Soyuz has moved to a safe distance away from the International Space Station, we will pick up our coverage with our third broadcast of the day. That will encompass the deorbit burn and landing coverage that will begin at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, with the deorbit burn scheduled again at 7:38 p.m. Central Time. The exact time, including seconds, by the way, is 7:38 and 39 seconds p.m. Central Time. It will be again a 4-minute, 39-second firing of the main engines and a retrograde maneuver to slow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit for its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere, targeted for a landing at 8:31 p.m. Central Time, 8:31 a.m. at the landing site on Wednesday morning. The coordinates for the landing, as of now, 47.20 degrees north latitude, 69 degrees and 34 minutes east longitude. We'll see ultimately what the final landing site touchdown point is in terms of latitude and longitude, but that is the target that was provided by the Math Modeling Center and the ballistics experts at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside of Moscow. The International Space Station currently is flying 252 miles above the Earth, moving from southeast to north, from southwest to northeast, in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator, moving across the northern Philippines, soon to pass over the Philippine Sea and almost directly over Tokyo.
Station Moscow Space Ground 1. Guys, it's time to move towards the Soyuz. Yes, we are starting now.
And as you heard, the Soyuz shift flight director at the Russian Mission Control Center reminding the crew that it's time to make their way, as you see them gathering in the passageway between the station and the Poisk module's vestibule, to the hatchway of the Soyuz in the background, to say farewell to one another. And from Mazurkin on the far right of your screen, Vandahai in the middle, and Akaba at the top of your screen, to take a few final photos, say farewell to their crewmates, and make their way inside the Soyuz vehicle that has been powered up and is now on autonomous power, ready for its undocking about 3 hours and 15 minutes from now.
Moscow, Station of Space Ground 1. And we are, I'm reporting that we do have the image of the MPEG image, and we're seeing it. Moscow on Space to Ground 1. Did you copy my report? Yes, we did. Okay, I'm activating TV coverage and communication on channel 2. Copy.
Final farewells. First, NASA Scott Tingle, now Norishige Kanai of JAXA. And the new station commander, Anton Shkaplerov, saying farewell to Mazurkin, Akaba, and Vandahai, who will momentarily make their way through the hatch into the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft to close the hatch and make final preparations to suit up and undock from the International Space Station just about 3 hours and 13 minutes from now.
Как слышите? Очень хорошо. Очень хорошо. Ну, отлично. Так, Антон, правильно говорю? Понимаю, я первый закрываю наш люк по БСУ. Может, давайте, да, втроем? Втроем сюда вылетите. Ну, 3 heads. Да. Сюда, ближе. You can come here. This camera. I take picture 3 hands. 3 hands. Yeah. Smile. Look happy. Суховском КС-канале Г2.
The Soyuz on autonomous power, with the crew about to close the hatch on the Soyuz side of the docking interface with the Poisk module. You see Anton Shkaplerov. He'll be wiping down the hatch seal interface that is customary to make sure there's no foreign object debris that would cause a problem with the leak checks that will take place before the vestibule, the short passageway at the interface between the Soyuz and the station once it is depressurized down to vacuum.
Антон, можно приступать к закрытию?
Я вас понял. Разрешили. Давайте, счастливо. Хорошей дороги, мягкой посадки.
And Shkaplerov has now closed the hatch on the Poisk side of the docking interface.
Альтаиры от нижнего зала, спасибо за работу, за прекрасные полгода. Штат распаковка и мягкие посадки. Ждем вас на земле.
This is Mission Control Houston. Now official confirmation that both hatches are closed at 1:58 p.m. Central Time, 2:58 p.m. Eastern Time. So the crew continuing to move along the way on the timeline. About 15 minutes from now, the crew on both sides of the hatch interface will conduct vestibule leak checks. The Soyuz crew, now behind that closed hatchway, that being Mazurkin, Vandehei, and Akaba, will then begin to don their Sokol launch and entry suits, conduct suit leak checks as they move along the timeline that will lead to the undocking of the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft from Poisk about 3 hours and 10 minutes from now. Undocking is scheduled again at 5:08 and 30 seconds p.m. Central Time.
Я понял. All right, so I'm going to start sending some commands.
Once again, the Soyuz spacecraft is comprised of 3 sections. The uppermost section, the bulbous section, if you will, is called the orbital module. The middle section is the descent module, where the crew will be strapped into their respective seats. Mazurkin in the center seat, flanked on his left by board engineer number 1, Mark Vandehei, and on the right by Joe Akaba, the 2 NASA flight engineers flanking Mazurkin for today's entry and landing. The rear section of the Soyuz spacecraft is the instrumentation and propulsion module. That is where the main engines are.
Понял тебя. По 28-й странице готовы работать?
And of course all the propulsion systems for the Soyuz spacecraft. Once the deorbit burn occurs a bit later in the day, the deorbit burn scheduled at 7:38 and 39 seconds p.m. Central Time, a 4-minute, 39-second retrograde maneuver to slow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, enabling it to drop out of orbit. Some 27 minutes after the deorbit burn, right before the spacecraft enters into the Earth's atmosphere, the 3 sections of the Soyuz will separate on pyrotechnic command. The descent module will be oriented with the heat shield in the direction of travel to ablate the buildup of heat against the spacecraft as they moved into the plasma regime. Returning crew members call this like returning to Earth in the middle of a fireball. But that's what the heat shield is all about, to ablate and dispel all of the heat that builds up around the descent module for about 5 minutes worth of entry into the peak heating regime, where the plasma builds up around the spacecraft itself.
И восстановилась индикация основного корабельного ССВП. Д7 горит. Выдаем команду Д8. Д8 выдали. Ступенчато открываем РПВ-1. Через закрытое положение, да, Марк? Угу. Хорошо, есть РПВ-1 открыт. Включаем питание ПКРД основной резервный. Есть. И да, Джо. Открываем ПКРД. Есть подача Л2 на ТС-8. Хорошо. Перешли на 29-ю страницу. Георгий, готовы работать, приступить к проверке герметичности переходных люков. Шаг 4.
Sasha, how do you copy me?
Саш, как меня слышно?
Слышу хорошо, Гоша. Доложил, что готовы работать по шагу 4, по странице 29.
Да, Саш, я все понял. Скажи мне, пожалуйста, давление ВСА текущее и парциальное давление кислорода.
Мы сейчас в находимся.
Moscow Station on Space to Ground 1. Go ahead.
23 миллиметра. Парциальное давление кислорода 152 миллиметра.
Нештатное включение фидера, питание МИН-2.
Related message, off nominal deactivation of MRM2 power feeder. Stand by.
Антон, все нормально, это штатом.
And Todd, that's an expected message. You can go ahead and clear it.
Принял, все нормально. Отвечаю.
Copy expected. Clearing the caution warning summary. Copy and concur.
While we have a minute here, again, you're looking at the closed hatch on the International Space Station side of the interface. Right behind that hatch is the closed hatch of the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft. The crews said goodbye to one another about 10 minutes or so ago. The hatches were closed at 1:58 p.m. Central Time, 2:58 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a few questions submitted on social media that we can answer for you at the moment. The first submitted, are there escape pods that eject from the station? Not exactly pods per se, but what departs the station is what you'll see later today, that being a Soyuz spacecraft. They're not escape pods, they're return vehicles. There are 2 Soyuzes at the station at any given time to provide a return capability for the 6 crew members on board the International Space Station. So although escape pods are not ejected per se, there are Soyuz spacecraft like the one we'll see undocking from the station a little over 3 hours from now that will bring home 3 of the 6 crew members currently residing on board the International Space Station. The next Twitter question that we received, how long does it take for the Soyuz to burn through the atmosphere? Basically, from the time of the deorbit burn that slows the Soyuz down, It enables that retrograde firing that we've been talking about that slows the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, enables it to drop out of low Earth orbit to begin its journey through the atmosphere back to the landing site. It takes about 53 minutes from the time of the deorbit burn until the landing itself. The crew will enter into the upper regions of the Earth's atmosphere some 30 minutes after the deorbit burn itself, and then the period of peak heating around the spacecraft is about a 5-minute transit until it gets low enough into the Earth's atmosphere for the peak heating to subside. Finally, after landing that is scheduled at 8:31 p.m. Central Time this evening, the question is, after landing from a long space trip, how long do your legs stay like jello before you can walk again? Essentially, that varies from crew member to crew member. Once the crew is extracted from the Soyuz vehicle at the landing site, they're placed in chairs right by their spacecraft to have a few minutes to get their land legs back and to regain their equilibrium. The crew, don't forget, has been off the planet for 168 days in a weightless environment with no gravity tugging at their lower extremities. So it takes a few days for the crew members, every crew member that returns from a long-duration spaceflight, to feel somewhat normal again and to get their equilibrium back. And again, this varies from crew member to crew member. All of these questions are great. They are submitted on the hashtag of Ask NASA, and we're happy to answer those questions from the public and from interested observers whenever we have an opportunity. As you look at this live view of the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow from a balcony camera overlooking the ISS flight control room there, just to recap, the 3 departing crew members from Expedition 54, Alexander Mazurkin, Joe Acaba, and Mark Vande Hei, they have closed the hatch to the transfer compartment, basically closing the hatch between the descent module and the upper portion of the Soyuz spacecraft, the orbital module. They soon will don their Sokol launch and entry suits, conduct leak checks on those suits, as well as at the interface, the docking interface between the Soyuz and the Poisk module of the International Space Station, to which their Soyuz spacecraft has been linked for the past 168 days. Down in Kazakhstan, where the temperature is in the mid-20s, it is overcast. There has been some freezing rain over the past 24 hours. The Russian search and recovery forces are finalizing their plans for the recovery of Mazurkin, Vande Hei, and Acaba once they touch down on the steppe of Kazakhstan, landing scheduled at 8:31 p.m. Central Time, which is 8:31 a.m. Wednesday morning, about 27 minutes after sunrise at the landing site. So we'll wrap up our coverage of hatch closure, which occurred at 1:58 p.m. Central Time. Everything is proceeding through the timeline to bring home Mazurkin, Vande Hei, and Acaba later this evening, with landing scheduled again at 8:31 p.m. Central Time this evening, 8:31 a.m. Kazakhstan time on Wednesday morning. We will be back in about 2.5 hours to resume our coverage of tonight's activities with undocking coverage. Our coverage beginning at 4:45 p.m. Central Time, 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time for the undocking, at 5:08 p.m. Central, 6:08 p.m. Eastern Time. Once again, thanks for joining us. We'll be back in a couple of hours to continue our coverage of the return to Earth of Soyuz MS-06, Mazurkin, Acaba, and Vande Hei. For now, this is Mission Control Houston.